If your family has ever told you get out and never come back, right after you just saved them from bankruptcy, then this story will show you exactly what happened next and why my response left them completely speechless. I'm Amanda, and for the past 8 years, I've been what you might call the family bank. Every time my parents hit a rough patch, from medical bills to home repairs, from car troubles to credit card debt, they called me. And I was always there, checkbook ready, no questions asked. Looking back now, I can see how perfectly they had me trained. It started small when I was 22 and just landed my first real job. Mom called crying about a $300 electric bill they couldn't cover. "Amanda, honey, we're so embarrassed to ask, but we just need a little help getting back on our feet." Of course I helped. What kind of daughter wouldn't? But $300 became $800 for car repairs, then a fine $200 for property taxes, then $3,000 for Dad's dental work. Each time it was presented as an emergency, a one-time thing, temporary assistance until they got back on track. Each time I told myself this was what family did for each other. By the time I was 30, I had given my parents over $75,000. Not loaned, given. Because every time I mentioned repayment, Mom would get that hurt look in her eyes and say something like, "Amanda, we raised you, fed you, put roof over your head for 18 years. We never kept track of what that cost us." That's how they operated. Every act of normal parenting became a debt I somehow owed. Every milestone in my life became overshadowed by their next financial crisis. I postponed my wedding twice because family comes first. I worked 2 jobs, my regular marketing position during the day and freelance graphic design at night, just to keep up with their demands and my own bills. My fiancé Jake tried to warn me. "Amanda, this isn't normal," he'd say gently, after watching me transfer another $1,000 to my parents' account. Healthy families don't work this way. But I'd brush off his concerns. He didn't understand. His family was different. My family needed me, and I was proud to be someone they could count on. The thing about financial abuse within families is that it doesn't feel like abuse when you're in it. It feels like love, like responsibility, like being the good daughter. My parents never demanded money outright. Instead, they created elaborate emotional scenarios designed to make me offer it willingly. They'd mention struggling with bills during casual conversations. Mom would accidentally leave past due notices on the kitchen counter when I visited. Dad would make comments about how proud they were that I was doing so well while they were barely scraping by. The guilt was carefully cultivated, expertly applied. And I fell for it every single time. I should have seen the red flags, like how they never provided detailed information about their finances, despite receiving thousands from me monthly. Or how my older brother Kevin always seemed to know exactly how much I'd contributed, even though I never discussed it with him. Or how they refused to let me see bank statements or bills, claiming they didn't want to burden me with details. But the biggest red flag was their reaction whenever I tried to set any boundaries. The few times I suggested they create a budget or meet with a financial advisor, they'd become defensive and hurt. "We thought you cared about family," Mom would say, tears welling up. We never expected our own daughter to question our integrity. So I stopped questioning. I stopped asking for accountability. I just kept giving, kept sacrificing, kept telling myself that this was temporary, that eventually they'd get back on their feet, and I could focus on my own life again. That night, the night that changed everything, started like so many others. My phone rang at 1 a.m., jolting me out of deep sleep. It was Mom, and I could hear the panic in her voice before she even spoke. "Amanda," she whispered, like someone might be listening. "Honey, I need you to sit down. We're in trouble. Real trouble." My heart immediately started racing. In my half-awake state, 1,000 scenarios flashed through my mind. Medical emergency, car accident, fire, something catastrophic. "What's wrong, Mom? Are you okay? Is Dad okay?" "We're fine physically," she said, her voice breaking. "But Amanda, we're going to lose the house. The bank is foreclosing. We have 1 week to come up with $20,000, or they're taking everything." The house I grew up in, where every childhood memory was made. The house my parents had lived in for 35 years, where they planned to grow old together. The thought of them losing it was unbearable. "How did this happen?" I asked, suddenly wide awake. "Your father's hours got cut at work 6 months ago," Mom explained through tears. "We've been trying to catch up on the mortgage, but we just kept falling further behind. We didn't want to worry you, so we didn't say anything. But now, Amanda, we don't know what to do. The bank won't work with us anymore." My mind immediately went into problem-solving mode. $20,000. It was exactly what I had in my savings account. Money I'd been carefully setting aside for my wedding and an emergency fund. Money that represented years of working 2 jobs and living below my means. "Mom, don't panic," I heard myself saying. "I can help. I have the money." The relief in her voice was immediate. "Oh, Amanda, oh, honey, I knew we could count on you. You're the only one who really understands what family means." As we talked through the logistics, Mom explained that they needed a cashier's check made out to the mortgage company by Friday, 3 days away. She gave me the account information and the exact amount needed. Everything seemed urgent but organized, like they'd already researched all the options. After we hung up, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. $20,000 was everything I had. But what choice did I have? I couldn't let my parents become homeless. Jake stirred beside me and asked what was wrong. When I explained the situation, he was quiet for a long moment. "Amanda," he said carefully, "doesn't it seem strange that they never mentioned being behind on the mortgage? That's not something that happens overnight." "They didn't want to worry me," I replied, already defensive. "And it doesn't matter how it happened. What matters is that I can fix it." But even as I said those words, something felt off. Maybe it was the way Mom had all the information so readily available. Maybe it was the convenient timing, exactly the amount I had in savings. Or maybe it was just that little voice in my head, the one I'd been silencing for years, finally getting loud enough to hear. The next morning, I went straight to the bank and withdrew $20,000 in the form of a cashier's check. My hands were shaking as I signed the withdrawal slip. This represented 5 years of careful saving, 5 years of sacrifice and planning for my future. But it was for family, and family was worth any sacrifice. I decided to drive to my parents' house immediately rather than mailing the check. Something this important deserved to be handled in person. Plus, I wanted to see them, to offer emotional support during what had to be an incredibly stressful time. The drive to their house gave me time to think, and the more I thought, the more questions arose. When exactly had Dad's hours been cut? Why hadn't they applied for mortgage assistance programs? Why hadn't they asked Kevin for help? He'd been doing well with his new job. But I pushed those questions aside. Crisis wasn't the time for analysis. It was time for action, for family solidarity, for stepping up when people you love needed you most. I arrived at their house around 8 a.m., expecting to find them stressed and grateful. Instead, I found something entirely different. Kevin's car was in the driveway. Through the kitchen window, I could see all three of them sitting around the table, papers spread out in front of them. They were talking animatedly, and nobody looked particularly distressed about impending homelessness. When I knocked on the door, the conversation stopped abruptly. Mom answered, and for just a split second, I saw something in her expression that I'd never seen before when she looked at me. Was it annoyance? "Amanda, what are you doing here so early?" "I brought the check," I said, holding up the envelope. "I wanted to make sure you got it safely." Kevin and Dad looked up from the table, and I noticed they quickly shuffled some papers together. The atmosphere felt strange, charged with an energy I couldn't identify. "That's wonderful, honey," Mom said, taking the envelope from me. "We can't tell you how much this means to us." But her words felt rehearsed, automatic. And she didn't open the envelope to look at the check, just set it aside on the counter like it was a piece of mail. I sat down at the table, expecting them to want to talk through next steps, to express relief, to show some emotion about narrowly avoiding disaster. Instead, they seemed eager to wrap up whatever conversation they'd been having before I arrived. "What are all these papers?" I asked, noticing official-looking documents scattered across the table. "Oh, just some property stuff," Dad said vaguely, gathering them up. "Nothing important." That's when Kevin made the comment that started my world unraveling. "Well, now that Amanda came through with the money, we can move forward with the plan." "The plan? What plan?" I looked around the table at three faces that suddenly seemed like strangers. "What plan?" I asked. There was a moment of awkward silence. Mom and Dad exchanged a look I couldn't interpret. Finally, Kevin spoke up with the casual tone you'd use to discuss weekend plans. "Mom and Dad want to downsize anyway. The house is too big for them now, so we're going to sell it and split the proceeds. With your $20,000, we'll have enough to buy Dad the boat. He's always wanted and still have money left over for their retirement." The words hit me like a physical blow. I sat there trying to process what I'd just heard, my brain refusing to make sense of it. "Wait," I said slowly. "What about the foreclosure? What about losing the house?" Another exchanged look. This time I recognized the expression. It was the same look they'd given each other when I was 12 and asked too many questions about why we suddenly had new furniture after Mom said we couldn't afford my school field trip. "Well," Mom said carefully, "technically there isn't a foreclosure notice yet, but there will be if we don't do something soon." "Yet?" The word came out sharper than I intended. "Mom, you told me you had 1 week. You said the bank was taking the house." "We're behind on payments," Dad jumped in. "It's essentially the same thing." But it wasn't the same thing, not even close. And somewhere in the back of my mind, pieces were starting to click together. The convenient timing, the exact amount I had available. Kevin's presence at this early morning family meeting. The papers they'd hidden when I arrived. "How far behind?" I asked. "Does it matter?" Mom's tone had shifted, becoming defensive. The point is, we needed help, and you provided it. That's what family does. Actually, it does matter, I said, standing up from the table. Because $20,000 is my entire savings account. It's my wedding fund and my emergency money. So yes, it matters whether this was actually an emergency or just convenient for your plans. The room went dead silent. I could hear the kitchen clock ticking, could hear a neighbor's dog barking outside. But inside this kitchen, where I'd eaten countless family dinners, where I'd helped with homework and celebrated birthdays, there was nothing but cold silence. Finally, Mom spoke, and her voice was different than I'd ever heard it. Hard, controlled, angry. After everything we've done for you, everything we've given you, this is how you respond to helping your family? With accusations and suspicion? I'm not accusing anyone of anything, I said, though even as I said it, I knew that wasn't entirely true. I'm just trying to understand what's really going on. What's going on? Kevin said, his voice taking on that condescending tone he'd used when we were kids. Is that you're being selfish and ungrateful? Mom and Dad raised you, supported you, and now when they need help, you're acting like they're criminals. The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that for a moment I almost believed them. Almost apologized for asking questions. Almost fell back into the role of the grateful daughter who never questioned the family narrative. But something had shifted in me that morning. Maybe it was the way they'd hidden those papers. Maybe it was Kevin's casual mention of the plan, like I was already supposed to know about it. Maybe it was just that I'd finally hit my breaking point. If this is really about preventing foreclosure, I said quietly, then you won't mind showing me the actual notice from the bank. That's when Mom exploded. Get out, she screamed, pointing toward the door. Get out and never come back. We don't need this kind of treatment from our own daughter. If you can't help your family without treating us like criminals, then we don't want your help at all. The words hit me like a slap. In 30 years, my mother had never spoken to me like that, never screamed at me, never told me to leave. Mom, I started, but she cut me off. No, I'm done. Take your suspicions and your accusations and get out, and don't come back until you remember what family loyalty means. I looked at Dad, expecting him to intervene, to calm things down. Instead, he just sat there looking uncomfortable, but saying nothing. Kevin was actually smirking, like this was somehow amusing. So I left. I walked out of that house with my hands shaking and my heart pounding, trying to process what had just happened. 20 minutes earlier, I'd been the hero saving my family's home. Now I was being thrown out for asking basic questions about how my money would be used. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of them through the kitchen window. They were already back at the table, already back to their papers and their plan. The crisis was over, the money was secured, and they were moving forward. Without me. For the first 2 weeks after that morning, I barely slept. I kept replaying the conversation, trying to understand what had gone wrong. Had I really been ungrateful? Had my questions been inappropriate? Was I being selfish for wanting to understand how my money was being used? But the more I thought about it, the more things didn't add up. And instead of continuing to beat myself up, I started to get curious, really curious. Why had they needed exactly $20,000, the exact amount I had in savings? Why was Kevin so involved in their financial planning when he'd never shown interest before? Why had they been discussing paperwork early in the morning on a weekday when Dad supposedly had his hours cut? Most importantly, why had a simple request to see the foreclosure notice triggered such an explosive reaction? So I started digging. It began with public records. Foreclosure notices are public information filed with the county clerk's office. I spent a lunch break at the courthouse searching through recent filings. My parents' address wasn't listed anywhere. Next, I checked the mortgage company's website. They had an online portal where borrowers could view their account status. I didn't have their login information, but I called the customer service line and explained that I was trying to help my parents avoid foreclosure. The representative was helpful and sympathetic. "I'm sorry," she said after looking up the account, "but this property doesn't show any foreclosure proceedings. In fact, the account is current as of this month's payment." Current, not 6 months behind, not in foreclosure, current. I sat in my car in the courthouse parking lot, staring at my phone, trying to process this information. Either the customer service representative was wrong, or my parents had lied about everything. But I needed more proof before I could accept that my own parents had orchestrated an elaborate deception to steal $20,000 from me. I started paying closer attention to their social media accounts. Dad's Facebook page showed him at work the previous week, working a full shift, not reduced hours. Kevin had posted pictures from a business conference, talking about exciting new opportunities and expanding the company. Then I found Kevin's LinkedIn profile. According to his recent updates, he'd been promoted 6 months ago, right around the time Dad's hours were supposedly cut. His new position came with a significant salary increase and stock options. But most damning was a post from 3 months ago where Kevin talked about launching his own consulting business on the side. The post mentioned needing startup capital, but being confident the right opportunity would present itself soon. 3 months ago. That was exactly when my parents started mentioning more frequent financial struggles, when their requests for help became more urgent and frequent. I screenshot everything, creating a digital file of evidence that painted a very different picture than the one my family had presented. But the final piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source. My Aunt Sarah, Mom's sister, who called me out of the blue on a Tuesday evening. "Amanda," she said, "I hope you don't mind me calling. Your mother mentioned you'd had some kind of falling out, but she wouldn't give me details. I'm worried about you." Aunt Sarah and I had always been close. She was the family member who remembered birthdays, who checked in during difficult times, who actually listened when you talked. If anyone would give me straight answers, it would be her. "Did Mom tell you anything about why we fought?" I asked carefully. "She said you refused to help them save the house from foreclosure, and then got angry when she asked you to reconsider." The lie was so complete, so reversed from reality, that I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I told Aunt Sarah the truth. The entire truth. The 1 a.m. phone call, the $20,000, the explosion when I asked questions, being thrown out of the house. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Amanda," she said finally, "your parents aren't behind on their mortgage. In fact, Linda was just bragging to me last week about how they paid it off early, and now they're thinking about buying a vacation property." Paid off early. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't call them demanding explanations. Instead, I sat down at my computer and started documenting everything. Every conversation, every transfer, every red flag I'd ignored, I printed bank statements showing 8 years of financial support. I saved screenshots of social media posts that contradicted their stories. I created a timeline that showed the careful orchestration of their final, massive deception. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't reacting emotionally to my family's manipulation. I was thinking strategically, and I was getting angry. Not hurt, sad angry, but cold, calculating angry. They had stolen $20,000 from me through an elaborate lie. They had manipulated my love and loyalty to fund Kevin's business venture. They had thrown me out of their house when I asked reasonable questions about how my money would be used. But worst of all, they had spent 8 years systematically conditioning me to be their personal ATM, training me to give without question, to sacrifice my own financial security for their convenience. The family bank was about to close permanently, but first they were going to learn exactly what it felt like to face the consequences of their choices. 3 weeks after the incident, as I was finishing my morning coffee and reviewing the evidence file I'd compiled, my phone rang. It was Dad. His voice was casual, almost cheerful, like nothing had happened between us. Like his wife hadn't screamed at me to never come back. Like they hadn't just scammed me out of my life savings. "Hey, Amanda, how are you doing?" I let the silence stretch for a moment, processing the audacity of the call. "I'm fine, Dad. What do you need?" "Well," he said, and I could hear the careful tone that meant he was about to ask for something. "Your mother and I were wondering why you haven't sent this month's mortgage payment. We're a little worried about making the deadline." The mortgage payment. The monthly $1,000 I'd been sending for the past 2 years to help with the house payment while they got back on their feet. The same mortgage that, according to Aunt Sarah, had been paid off weeks ago. The same mortgage that, according to the bank's customer service, had never been behind. This was it. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, planning for, preparing for. "Dad," I said, my voice perfectly calm, "I did send the mortgage payment. I transferred it directly to the account, just like always." "What account? Amanda, we're not seeing any deposit." "Account number ending in 7849, I said, reading from the bank transfer confirmation on my computer screen. "I sent it 3 days ago, same as always." There was a pause, a long pause. "Amanda, that's not our mortgage account. We don't have an account ending in those numbers." "You don't?" I let confusion creep into my voice. "But Dad, that's the account number Mom gave me. She said it was for the mortgage payment to help catch up after you fell behind." Another pause, longer this time. "Amanda, we're not behind on the mortgage." "You're not? But what about the foreclosure? What about the $20,000 I gave you to save the house?" "What $20,000? And there it was. He was actually going to pretend the whole thing never happened. "Dad," I said, my voice getting stronger, 3 weeks ago, Mom called me at 1 a.m. crying about losing the house. She said you needed exactly $20,000 to prevent foreclosure. I gave you my entire savings account. Amanda, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. The account I've been sending mortgage payments to for 2 years, I continued. Account ending in 7849. According to my bank records, that's Kevin's business account. The same Kevin who needed startup capital for his consulting company. The same Kevin who was at your house that morning when I brought the check. Silence. Complete, dead silence. I know about the conference Kevin attended on the company dime while you were supposedly having your hours cut. I know about his promotion 6 months ago. I know the house was never in foreclosure. I know you paid off the mortgage early and were bragging to Aunt Sarah about buying vacation property. More silence. Dad, I said, my voice now completely steady, I know everything. The question is, what are you going to do about it? When he finally spoke, his voice had changed completely. Gone was the casual, cheerful tone. Gone was the confusion and misunderstanding act. Amanda, you need to understand. No, Dad, you need to understand. For 8 years, I've given you over $75,000 because I thought you needed help. I worked 2 jobs. I postponed my wedding. I sacrificed my own financial security because I believed we were family, and that's what families do for each other. My voice was getting stronger with every word. But families don't lie to each other about foreclosures that don't exist. Families don't steal money under false pretenses. And families definitely don't scream, "Get out and never come back," when someone asks reasonable questions about how their money is being used. Amanda, please, let us explain. There's nothing to explain, Dad. It's all very clear. You wanted money for Kevin's business. You knew I wouldn't just hand over $20,000 for that. So you created a fake emergency, complete with tears and panic and family guilt. You manipulated me into giving you everything I had saved. I paused, letting that sink in. And when I asked one simple question, to see the foreclosure notice, you threw me out of your house rather than risk me discovering the truth. Your mother was upset. Your mother was caught. And instead of admitting it and apologizing, she chose to attack me and throw me out. And you chose to sit there and let it happen. Another long silence. What do you want from us, Amanda? It was a fair question. What did I want? An apology? The money back? For them to admit what they'd done? I want you to understand that the family bank is permanently closed, I said finally. No more mortgage payments to Kevin's business account. No more emergency funds for fake crises. No more financial support of any kind, for any reason, ever again. Amanda, you're our daughter. Daughters don't get told to never come back, Dad. Daughters don't get lied to and manipulated and thrown away when they become inconvenient. I've been your ATM for 8 years, but ATMs don't have feelings. ATMs don't have dreams or savings accounts or wedding plans. ATMs just give money when you push the right buttons. My voice dropped to almost a whisper. Congratulations, Dad. You found all the right buttons to push, but this ATM is permanently out of order. And then I hung up. For the first time in 8 years, I had hung up on a family member asking for money, and it felt incredible. I thought that phone call with Dad would be the end of it, that my clear boundaries and the evidence I'd presented would finally make them understand the consequences of their actions. I was wrong. Within 24 hours of hanging up on Dad, my phone started ringing nonstop. First, it was Mom, leaving voicemails that ranged from tearful apologies to angry accusations. Then Kevin called, his voice tight with barely controlled rage, demanding, "Stop being dramatic and think about family." Extended family members I hadn't heard from in months suddenly reached out, all with the same message. Amanda was being unreasonable. Amanda needed to forgive and forget. Amanda should remember that family is forever. It became clear that my parents had launched a full-scale campaign to control the narrative. They were painting themselves as the victims of an ungrateful daughter who had suddenly turned against family for no reason. According to their version of events, they'd asked for help with some financial difficulties. I'd agreed to help, but then inexplicably became hostile and cut them off without explanation. The lies were so smooth, so believable, that I almost questioned my own memory of events. Almost. But I had documentation, screenshots, bank records, phone logs, timeline evidence. And more importantly, I had Aunt Sarah, who knew the truth about their paid-off mortgage and vacation property plans. That's when I realized this wasn't just about getting my money back or receiving an apology. This was about something much bigger. They were trying to isolate me from the entire extended family, to turn everyone against me so I'd have no choice but to crawl back and resume my role as the family ATM. It was psychological warfare, and they were playing for keeps. But they had made one crucial mistake. They thought I was still the same person who would break under family pressure, who would prioritize peace over justice, who would sacrifice anything to avoid confrontation. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The perfect opportunity presented itself 2 weeks later. Kevin's business launch event was scheduled for a Saturday evening at the Country Club, a big public celebration with investors, potential clients, and most of our extended family in attendance. According to his LinkedIn posts, this was going to be the official announcement of his consulting firm, complete with networking and speeches about his vision for the future. My parents would be there, proudly supporting their son's new venture. The venture funded by my stolen $20,000. Kevin had sent me an invitation weeks earlier, back when we were all still playing happy family. I'd RSVP'd yes before everything fell apart, and interestingly, no one had bothered to uninvite me. I spent that week carefully preparing, not just emotionally, but strategically. I printed copies of bank records showing every transfer I'd made to my parents over 8 years. I had screenshots of Kevin's social media posts about needing startup capital. I had documentation proving the house was never in foreclosure. Most importantly, I had copies of bank transfers showing exactly where my mortgage payments had actually been going. I also reached out to a few key family members who I knew would listen to facts over emotions. Aunt Sarah was already on my side, but I also called my cousin Mark, who worked in banking, and my uncle Jim, who had always been the family's voice of reason. I didn't tell them what I was planning to do. I just made sure they knew the truth about what had happened, backed up with evidence. I wanted allies in the room when the truth came out. Saturday evening arrived, and I dressed carefully. Professional but approachable. Confident but not aggressive. I needed to look like someone who belonged in that room, someone whose word carried weight. The country club was decorated beautifully for Kevin's big night. There were probably 60 people there, a mix of potential investors, family members, and Kevin's professional network. My parents were working the room like proud hosts, Mom in a new dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, Dad in a suit I'd never seen before. I watched them for a while from across the room, noting how comfortable they looked, how generous they were being with the bar tab, how confidently they discussed their son's bright future. These were not people struggling financially. These were people celebrating a successful scheme. Kevin gave his speech around 8 o'clock. He talked about taking risks, about believing in yourself. about having the courage to pursue your dreams. He thanked his parents for their unwavering support and their belief in his vision. He thanked his investors for their confidence in his abilities. He did not thank his sister for funding his startup with her life savings. When Kevin finished speaking and the crowd started mingling again, I made my move. I approached the small group gathered around my parents, timing it perfectly as Mom was telling someone about how proud they were of Kevin's accomplishments. "Mom," I said warmly, stepping into the circle like nothing had ever happened between us. "What a wonderful event. Kevin must be so grateful for all the support you've given his business." She looked startled to see me, but quickly recovered, putting on her public face. "Amanda, we didn't expect you to come." "Of course I came," I said with a bright smile. "This is such an important night for Kevin. Launching a business takes so much capital. It's amazing that you were able to help fund his dream." There were several people listening now, including 2 men who had been introduced earlier as potential investors. Mom's smile became strained. "Well, we believe in supporting our children," she said carefully. "Absolutely," I agreed enthusiastically. "I think it's wonderful that my $20,000 could help launch Kevin's consulting firm. It's so nice when family money goes toward something productive." The temperature in our little circle seemed to drop 10 degrees. Mom's face went pale, while one of the investors looked confused. "20,000?" the investor asked. "I thought Kevin's initial funding came from his parents' retirement savings." "Oh, it did," I said, my smile never wavering. "From my retirement savings, actually. Well, technically my wedding and emergency fund, but same concept. Mom called me 3 weeks ago, crying about losing the house to foreclosure, and I gave them everything I had saved to prevent it." Now everyone in the circle was paying attention. Dad appeared at Mom's elbow, his face carefully neutral, but his eyes sharp with warning. "Amanda," he said quietly, "this isn't the time or place." "For what?" I asked innocently. "For celebrating Kevin's success, for acknowledging how the family came together to support his business dreams. I think it's exactly the right time and place." I turned back to the investor, who was looking increasingly uncomfortable, but also intrigued. "The interesting thing is, it turns out the house was never actually in foreclosure. According to my Aunt Sarah, my parents paid off their mortgage early and are actually looking at vacation property. Isn't that wonderful? They're doing so well financially that they could afford to help Kevin without any real hardship." "Amanda," Mom hissed, but I continued as if I hadn't heard her. "Of course, I didn't know that when I emptied my savings account to save the house, and I definitely didn't know my monthly mortgage payments for the past 2 years were actually going directly into Kevin's business account, rather than, toward any actual mortgage." By now, our conversations had attracted a larger audience. Kevin appeared at the edge of our group, his face flushed with anger or embarrassment or both. "What is she doing here?" he demanded of our parents. "I'm here to support you," I said brightly, "and to set the record straight about how your business got funded. I mean, these investors deserve to know the truth about your startup capital, don't they? About how it was obtained through a fake family emergency?" "You're lying," Kevin said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Am I?" I opened my purse and pulled out a folder of papers. "Because I have bank records showing every transfer. I have screenshots of the bank transfer confirmation. sending $20,000 to your business account. On the same day, Mom told me it was going to save the house. I have documentation proving the house was never in foreclosure. I handed copies to the two investors, who took them with obvious interest. I also have records showing that for 2 years I've been sending $1,000 monthly to what I thought was my parents' mortgage account. But it was actually Kevin's business account the entire time. That's $24,000 in additional funding that came through deception. The room had gone quiet around us. Even people not directly involved in our conversation had stopped talking and were watching our family drama unfold. Kevin snatched the papers from one of the investors. "This is private family business," he said angrily. "Amanda is having some kind of breakdown and—" "Kevin," I interrupted, my voice still calm, but now carrying an edge of steel. "I am having the opposite of a breakdown. I am having a breakthrough. For 8 years, I've been funding this family's lifestyle while sacrificing my own, $75,000 over 8 years to be exact." I looked around at all the faces watching us, some shocked, some fascinated, some clearly uncomfortable but unable to look away. I worked 2 jobs to send money home every month because I thought my family needed help. I postponed my wedding twice because family emergencies kept arising. I have been the family's personal ATM for my entire adult life. My voice was getting stronger, more confident with each word. But ATMs don't have feelings. ATMs don't have dreams or goals or plans for the future. ATMs just give money when you push the right buttons. And my family got very, very good at pushing the right buttons. "Amanda, stop," Dad said, stepping forward. "You're embarrassing yourself." "No, Dad, I'm embarrassing you. There's a difference." I turned back to the investors who were still looking through the bank records. 3 weeks ago, when I asked to see the foreclosure notice that supposedly threatened my childhood home, my mother screamed at me to get out and never come back. Not because I refused to help, but because I asked questions about how my money was being used. "That's not what happened," Mom said desperately, but her voice was shaking. "Mom," I said, looking directly at her, "I have a recording of Dad's phone call 2 weeks ago where he pretended not to know about the $20,000, where he acted confused about which account the mortgage payments were going to, where he tried to gaslight me into thinking I was misremembering everything that happened. This was a bluff. I didn't actually have a recording, but the way Dad's face went white told me I'd hit the mark. By now, Aunt Sarah had pushed through the crowd and was standing beside me. Uncle Jim was there too, along with several cousins who had been getting updates on the situation. "Linda," Aunt Sarah said, her voice cutting through the tension. "Is this true? Did you lie to Amanda about foreclosure to get money for Kevin's business?" Mom looked around the room, realizing that her carefully constructed narrative was crumbling in front of everyone who mattered. The investors, the extended family, Kevin's professional network, they were all hearing the truth about how this successful business launch had actually been funded. "It's complicated," she said finally. "No," I said firmly, "it's not complicated at all. You stole my money through deception. When I asked questions, you threw me out rather than admit what you'd done. And then you launched a campaign to turn the entire family against me to cover up your lies." I looked around the room at all the watching faces. For 8 years, I believed that family loyalty meant giving everything you had, without question, sacrificing your own needs for the good of the family, never asking for accountability or transparency. I thought that was love. My voice cracked slightly, but I continued. But real family doesn't lie to you about emergencies to steal your savings. Real family doesn't manipulate your loyalty to fund someone else's business venture. Real family doesn't scream at you to never come back when you ask reasonable questions about how your money is being used. The room was completely silent now, except for the soft background music that no one had thought to turn off. "So congratulations, Kevin," I said, turning to my brother. "Your business is officially launched, and everyone here now knows exactly how it was funded, through lies, manipulation, and the financial abuse of a family member who trusted you." I closed my purse and looked around the room one more time. "The family bank is permanently closed," I announced. "There will be no more emergency funds, no more mortgage payments, no more financial support of any kind. You want to play happy family in public while stealing from me in private? Fine. But you'll do it without my money." I turned to leave, but Kevin grabbed my arm. "You can't do this to us," he said desperately. "We're family." I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back up at his face. "No, Kevin, family doesn't do this to family. What you did to me, that's what strangers do to each other. That's what criminals do to their victims." I pulled my arm free. "I'm not your victim anymore, and I'm not your ATM anymore. Figure out how to fund your own life like the rest of the world. Intai." I walked out of that country club with my head high, leaving behind a room full of shocked faces and uncomfortable silence. Behind me, I could hear voices starting to rise. Family members demanding explanations, investors asking hard questions, Kevin and my parents trying to do damage control. But I didn't look back. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of consequences that unfolded exactly as I'd hoped they would. Word spread quickly through our extended family and the local business community about what had happened at Kevin's launch event. The investors who'd been considering working with Kevin pulled out, citing concerns about his ethical foundation and family integrity. Several potential clients who'd been at the event decided to take their business elsewhere. Kevin's consulting firm, which had been poised for success, began struggling almost immediately. Without additional investor confidence and with several clients backing out, the business started hemorrhaging money. The $20,000 he'd stolen from me was quickly eaten up by startup costs and legal fees as he tried to salvage his professional reputation. My parents' social standing in their community took a massive hit. The story of how they'd scammed their own daughter out of her life savings spread through their church, their social clubs, and their neighborhood. People who had respected them for decades began questioning everything they thought they knew about Linda and Robert Martinez. More importantly, other family members started coming forward with their own stories. Cousin Mark mentioned how Dad had borrowed $5,000 3 years ago for a medical emergency that turned out to be a fishing trip. Aunt Jennifer revealed that Mom had guilt-tripped her into paying for expensive Christmas gifts with stories about their financial struggles. A pattern emerged of financial manipulation and emotional blackmail that extended far beyond just me. I wasn't their only victim, I was just their most successful mark. But the consequences weren't just financial or social, they were deeply personal. Uncle Jim called me a week after the country club incident. "Amanda," he said, "I owe you an apology. Your parents called me after you left and tried to convince me that you were having some kind of mental breakdown. But after seeing those bank records and hearing from other family members, it's clear what really happened. Similar calls came from other relatives. Cousins who had initially criticized me for airing family business in public began to understand that public exposure was the only way to stop the cycle of abuse. Aunt Sarah organized a family meeting without my parents or Kevin, where we discussed how to handle the situation going forward. The consensus was clear. My parents had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Their behavior wasn't just about money. It was about trust, respect, and the fundamental bonds that hold families together. They had violated all of those things in pursuit of easy money for Kevin's business venture. 3 months after the country club incident, I got a call from Mom. Her voice was different, smaller, more defeated than I'd ever heard it. "Amanda," she said, "I need you to know that Kevin's business failed. The investors pulled out, clients left, and he had to close everything down." I didn't respond immediately, waiting to see where this conversation was going. "Your father and I," she continued, "we've had to take out a second mortgage on the house to cover Kevin's debts. He's moved back in with us, and he's not handling it well." Still, I said nothing. "People in town won't look at us the same way," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "Our pastor asked us to step down from the church board. My book club friends have stopped calling. Your father lost 2 clients from his accounting practice. I'm sorry to hear that you're facing consequences for your actions," I said finally, my voice carefully neutral. "Amanda, please, we made mistakes. We see that now, but we're family. Can't we find a way to work through this?" It was the conversation I'd been expecting for months. The moment when the consequences became too heavy to bear, and they came crawling back, hoping to resume business as usual. "Mom," I said gently, "do you remember what you screamed at me when I asked to see the foreclosure notice?" There was a long pause. "I was upset," she said finally. "You told me to get out and never come back. You said you didn't want my help if it came with questions and accountability. You said I needed to learn what family loyalty meant." I didn't mean, "Yes, you did. You meant every word." And now I've learned exactly what family loyalty means. It means that real family doesn't lie to you about emergencies to steal your money. Real family doesn't manipulate your love to fund someone else's dreams. Real family doesn't throw you away when you become inconvenient. My voice was steady, sure. "You taught me those lessons, Mom, through your actions, not your words, and now I'm living by them." "So what does that mean for us?" she asked, though I think she already knew the answer. "It means I'm living my best life without people who see me as a resource to be exploited, rather than a person to be loved. It means I'm planning a wedding with money I've saved myself, building a future with someone who values me for who I am, not what I can provide financially." I paused, looking out the window of my new apartment, the one my parents didn't know the address of. "It means I'm finally free from the exhausting burden of being everyone else's financial safety net. And it means I sleep peacefully at night, knowing that no one can manipulate me into sacrificing my own well-being for their convenience." "Amanda, the family bank is closed, Mom, permanently. There's no going back from what you did. No amount of apologies or consequences or suffering is going to make me forget that when I needed honesty, you gave me lies. When I needed respect, you gave me manipulation. When I needed family, you gave me exploitation. I took a deep breath. I hope you figure out how to rebuild your life, I really do. But you'll do it without my money, without my emotional labor, and without my participation in the fantasy that what you did to me was somehow acceptable family behavior. You're really never coming back? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Mom, I said, you told me never to come back, unless I learned what family loyalty meant. Well, I learned, and now I'm loyal to a family that actually values me. My chosen family, my future husband, the relatives who stood by me when the truth came out. You'll change your mind eventually, she said, but there was no conviction in her voice. No, I said with absolute certainty, I won't. And I hung up. 6 months later, I'm writing this story from the kitchen table of the house Jake and I just bought together. We got married 3 weeks ago in a small ceremony surrounded by people who love us, including Aunt Sarah, Uncle Jim, and several cousins, who have become even closer since we went through this experience together. Our honeymoon was amazing. 2 weeks in Italy, paid for with money I saved myself, money that belonged to me and wasn't earmarked for someone else's crisis or convenience. I have a new phone number now, new address, new boundaries that are harder than steel and clearer than crystal. My savings account is growing again. My relationship with Jake is stronger than ever. He watched me stand up to years of manipulation and abuse, and his respect for my strength has deepened our bond immeasurably. Most importantly, I have peace, real peace. The kind that comes from knowing that no one can guilt you, manipulate you, or exploit you because you've learned to recognize the tactics and you have the strength to say no. I don't miss the drama. I don't miss the crisis calls. I don't miss the sleepless nights wondering how I was going to cover everyone else's emergencies while neglecting my own needs. I do miss the family I thought I had, but I've learned that the family I thought I had never actually existed. It was a carefully constructed illusion designed to keep me in line, keep me giving, keep me sacrificing myself for other people's convenience. The real family I have now, Jake, Aunt Sarah, Uncle Jim, my chosen friends, my supportive coworkers, they would never ask me to set myself on fire to keep them warm. They celebrate my successes instead of seeing them as opportunities to ask for money. They offer support without strings attached and accept help without expecting it to continue indefinitely. This is what healthy family looks like. This is what love without manipulation feels like. Sometimes people ask me if I regret how everything went down, if I wish I had handled it differently, more privately, with less public exposure. The answer is no, absolutely not. Predators rely on their victims' silence. Manipulators count on their targets being too embarrassed or too loyal to expose the truth. Family abusers especially depend on the idea that family business should stay private, no matter how destructive or harmful it becomes. By exposing the truth publicly, I didn't just free myself, I freed other potential victims. I broke the cycle of financial abuse that had been going on for years. I showed other family members that it was okay to say no, okay to ask questions, okay to demand transparency. Most importantly, I proved to myself that I was worth defending, that my financial security mattered, that my future mattered, that I mattered. The family bank is closed forever, and the woman who used to run it has never been happier, healthier, or more free. If you're in a similar situation, being used as an ATM by family members who manipulate your love and loyalty, please know that you deserve better. You deserve relationships based on genuine care rather than financial convenience. You deserve to build your own future without constantly sacrificing it for other people's poor decisions. Real love doesn't come with a price tag. Real family doesn't require you to set yourself on fire to keep them warm. And you are worth so much more than what you can provide financially. The bank is closed. Keep it that way.